Welcome to my channel, and today we are talking about cells. Broadly speaking, there are two categories of cells that we look at. We look at the eukaryotes, which include animal and plant cells, and then there are the prokaryotes. The example we usually look at is bacteria. Generally speaking, eukaryotic cells are larger and more complex, while prokaryotic cells have no membrane-bound organelles and are often single-celled organisms by themselves. Another key difference is in DNA. The DNA of prokaryotic cells floats around freely and is also found as rings of DNA called plasmids. Hey, wait a minute, I want my DNA to be floating around freely. Well, unfortunately for you, the DNA inside of eukaryotes doesn't quite float freely around the cell, but it is found in this. You see, hey, get me out of here, man. You see, in eukaryotic cells, the DNA is found inside of the nucleus. Oh, I'm inside of a nucleus, I see. Well, that's a great explanation. Can you get me out of here now? Hello? You there? Is anyone there? Hello? Now let's look at some of these organelles that we keep hearing about. Organelles is the term we give to these subcellular structures. So these are the bits that make up a cell. Now you might have heard of the term sub before. For example, if we go into the ocean and we try to go underneath it and see what's inside of it, we might use a submarine. Similarly, if we're looking inside of an atom, the little bits and bobs, electrons, protons and neutrons that make up an atom are called the subatomic particles. Just like that, the bits that make up a cell are referred to as subcellular structures or organelles. Time to draw some cells and some subcellular structures. Hey, I promised a diagram, not a work of art. First, we start off with the nucleus. The nucleus is what we call the brain of the cell, and we call that because it contains the genetic information that is required to carry out any other processes that the cell requires. Sometimes you might see the term nuclei. Nuclei is actually the plural of the word nucleus. Then we have the ribosomes. This is where protein synthesis takes place. Synthesis, or to synthesize something, is to make something. That is why you might remember a little something called photosynthesis from back in the day. Then there's the mitochondrion. Now this is something that some of you might remember as the so-called powerhouse of the cell. Unfortunately, if you're doing GCSE, you'll have to stop referring to it as the powerhouse of the cell. Instead, be more specific and mention the actual reaction that takes place inside, which is aerobic respiration, where glucose is broken down to release energy. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, I don't remember mitochondrion, but I do remember mitochondria. Mitochondria is actually the plural for mitochondrion. Then there's the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane, as you can tell, sort of keeps the cell together, but the main function that we have to mention if we're asked about it is that it controls what goes in and out of the cell.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me.
You and me both, brother. In fact, we are in the cytoplasm, which is the watery part of the cell. This is the site of all chemical reactions, and most of the enzyme activity takes place in this area. And now we come to the Golgi body or the Golgi apparatus. Now luckily this is stuff that you usually cover at A levels, but you will see this organelle appear time and time again on cell diagrams and cell illustrations. So I thought, why not tell you a little bit about it. The Golgi body is involved in the transport, sorting and modification of both proteins and lipids. And now we come across the plant cell. Now the interesting thing about the plant cell is that it pretty much has all the organelles that you expect in an animal cell, except there's a few additional ones that we need to know about. First of all, surrounding the plant cell is a rigid cell wall, a cellulose cell wall. Cellulose is a special kind of sugar that makes up the cell wall. Now that is a very important point to remember. Now, as you might have guessed, the cell wall provides structure and support to the plant cell and also strengthens it. However, one thing that you shouldn't say is that the cell wall controls what goes in and out of the cell. That is the job of the cell membrane. And now we come to this big white blob that you usually see in plant cell diagrams. This is called the permanent vacuole. The permanent vacuole holds salts and sugars. However, one of the main functions that you have to be able to describe is that the vacuole actually pushes all the subcellular structures around to sort of fill up the cell properly. Now you might have noticed that I've been calling it the permanent vacuole, and there's a reason for that. You see, in plants, animals and bacteria cells, every now and then smaller vacuoles might be created to facilitate certain activities in the cells. However, in the plant cell, this particular vacuole exists permanently. And now we come to this green organelle here. This is called the chloroplast, and it is the site of photosynthesis. Chloroplasts contain green pigments called chlorophyll. These pigments absorb sunlight, and that energy is then used to create glucose molecules. Chlorophyll is a green pigment that makes plants and leaves look green. And now we come to prokaryotic cells, or the example that we usually look at, bacterial cells. Now, as stated in the beginning of the video, prokaryotes lack membrane-bound organelles. However, there are still some organelles that they have that you can find in animal and plant cells. For example, just like plant cells, bacterial cells also have cell walls. However, key thing, these are not made of cellulose. They are not cellulose cell walls. Bacteria also have cell membranes which control what goes in and out of the cell. However, the DNA, as we mentioned before, floats freely around the cell as opposed to being inside of a nucleus. Now you can have a strand of DNA as visible in this diagram, but you also have plasmids, these perfect looking rings of DNA. Now in the beginning of this video, when we looked at an overview of what differentiates prokaryotes from eukaryotes, one of the things I mentioned was that prokaryotes are often single-celled organisms. Therefore, they require something that can help them navigate and move around. For this, they have hair-like structures called flagella. Flagellum is the singular, while flagella is the plural. Interestingly, the tail on a sperm cell is also called a flagellum. Now lastly, it's worth mentioning that even though I did not draw it, you might come across some diagrams where bacteria contains ribosomes. Now let's see how much of this bad boy lesson can you remember. Pause the video here, write down the numbers and try to write down the corresponding subcellular structures. Then press play to see the answers. Starting off with the animal cell. Answer time. And now the plant cell. Answer time. And now bacteria. Answer time. I hope you enjoyed that lesson. Please hit that like button, share this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you can, please help me out at buymeacoffee.com. Nucleus here, looking for some freedom. Somebody? Anybody? Hello?